As an ABC cadet in 2007, I was involved in doing a trauma awareness workshop. I suppose then I knew it would be something I would face at some stage. I just didn't have a personal context then. Over the following couple, I was involved in covering some pretty traumatic events, anything from some nasty car crashes to murders and the drowning of a toddler. But nothing really came close to covering the Victorian bushfires in February of this year, where several thousand people were made homeless and nearly 200 people died.
The strong winds and difficult terrain have made conditions so dangerous that no one has been allowed near this town on the ground. Even crews have been pulled from the fire front.
I was covering the bushfires from day one and spent many days on the road, confronted with some pretty difficult images and doing some pretty difficult interviews. But one of the real positives was the support I had from people at home and from people in the office. And I think it was several days after Black Saturday that I got a phone call from Lisa Miller. It was just really wonderful to speak to someone of her experience and just to know that colleagues were concerned for her.
What I think is important as a peer supporter is to be constantly proactive, to be looking at the stories people are doing and wondering whether a simple phone call from me or one of the other peer supporters might actually make a difference to their day. Because I think that if the peer support program had been in place when I was going through and doing some of the stories that I've done over the years, that would have made a difference to me. And that's why, off our own bat, I guess, after the fires, I just picked up the phone, rang a few people just to say hi and how are you going.
I'm a peer supporter in the Melbourne newsroom. I'm also a senior cameraman in the Melbourne newsroom, and so consequently found myself covering the bushfires of Black Saturday. I was quite concerned for some of our less experienced operators, as some of them had never been to bushfires before and certainly hadn't experienced some of the conditions and tragedy that they were facing up there. So it's important to keep in touch with them as a peer, and simply been by sending them a text or a quick phone call to let them know that someone was thinking about them. Similarly, I heard from my colleagues and peers interstate, and a quick phone call from them also was comforting and reassuring to me, and I found it of great benefit.
One of the things that often worries people is that when they're in the middle of a story, they don't feel anything. They don't feel upset. They don't feel that overwhelming compassion. They don't feel probably as empathetic as they should. And what I've discovered over the years, and what I've discovered as I've been a peer supporter, is that there's some sort of a protective device that cuts in. It's the same thing that firemen, ambulancemen, doctors in emergency wards find as well. That when you're in the middle of something, that protective device cuts in. You're able to just put the emotional stuff aside and do your job. This is the immediate aftermath of an attack on an American convoy on the main road to Baghdad Airport. Blazing fiercely behind me, an American vehicle that's been struck by the blast. Over to my left, the vehicle that contained the bomb. The problem often comes days, weeks, even months later, when that sort of stuff then comes back, and then you've got to deal with it. It may come back to haunt you as a dream. It may come back as a general feeling of grumpiness, disquiet, any one of a number of symptoms. But almost certainly at some stage later, it will come back to haunt you, and that's the time you've got to deal with it.
Well, basically, I'd been working in the Middle East for about 2.5, 3 years and dealing with suicide bombings in Israel, deaths in Gaza and the West Bank through Israeli incursions and invasions, and also the Iraq War we'd been in before. We'd been in sort of at the end of the war and then for weeks after the war. And, you know, you think you deal with these things quite well. You have a few beers with your mates, you smile about it, you laugh about funny little things you see, but you know, deep down a few things nag at you, but you sort of suppress them, you don't want to talk to your wife about them. Hamas is now threatening revenge against Israel, saying anyone who dreams of peace is mistaken. Here in Gaza, the funerals of the victims led by angry protests calling for a new wave of suicide bombings against Israel. And that's what I did, but after 2.5, 3 years I noticed I was getting a bit edgy. My wife had just given birth to our first child, and that was a momentous and wonderful event, but unfortunately it seemed to bring up a lot of what I'd seen. I became very nervous, I was a bit angry, I was very short-tempered with people, and basically my wife said, look, I think you're changing, I think something's wrong, I think we go and talk to someone. And the fact that she said, I think we need to go and talk, was a nice incentive, because it was a team effort. She's always been a good support to me, and so she took it upon herself to find a counsellor that we could go and talk to, and that's what we did over a number of weeks, over a couple of months in fact, and I'd go in there and every Tuesday have a chat to this woman about what I'd seen, and she was shocked, and she couldn't believe just how I'd bottled it up for so long.
Trauma can impact. You do one story, it can be, if it's a significantly intense story where you feel out of control, you're feeling helpless, you're feeling a high level of distress. So that's what we call a type 1 or a one event type trauma, which can really have a significant outcome. But if you're doing lower level but yet still traumatic reporting or covering assignments, then it can build up. If you feel those levels of distress, if you feel that sense of helplessness, a period of time, it just builds up and up and up.
I realised that what I'd been doing since the first war I covered 30 years ago at the end of the 70s, and what most of my friends who'd managed to sort of get through these things had done, is simply talk to their mates. I guess the ABC spent an awful lot of money on long-distance phone calls over the years as we called up and chatted about what had happened to us during the day and got it out of our system. And I very quickly came to realise that as peer supporters, that's what we do. We listen. There doesn't have to be anything formal, although sometimes you can set up a formal situation. When I was in Baghdad covering the election a few years ago, there were a few of us there, myself, Mark Willisey and Tim Stewart, the cameraman, and we discovered that each evening a lot of our staff in the ABC house would go off to prayers at sunset, the evening prayers. The call to prayer would come from the mosque across the river, and off they'd go. And we decided we did what we called a call to beer, and it may be a little bit sacrilegious, but what we did was when the call to prayer went out for the evening prayers, we'd go onto the roof next to our sandbag bunker on the roof, and we'd go up there and simply talk. That would be our circuit breaker in the day. We'd talk about the horrors of the day, not specifically about work, but we'd talk about things that affected us. We'd talk about home, we'd talk about simple things. And by instituting our call to beer, we provide a breaker in the day.
I think when I talk to a peer, I'm looking for reassurance that maybe I'm not going mad, that this is a natural human response to a traumatic event, and also maybe a little bit of advice as to how to deal with it. Everyone's different, so you can't have one person say, look, this is how I dealt with it and it worked and I'm fine. It might not work. You need just a little bit of a pointer about where you're headed, and maybe also you need from your peers that early warning system that, okay, look, I think he's not he's not coping with that situation. Hey, let's give him a call and just have a quiet chat with him. Let's not make anything official. Let's not say, hey, Willis is going mad or he's nuts. Let's just have a talk to him about, how he's feeling. And that was always something that my friends did for me, and I made sure with a couple of my mates within the ABC that, when they looked a bit out of sorts, you always asked them if they're okay, and you always did it privately, and you always did it in a very low-key manner without sort of insinuating that they were going slightly mad.
One of the things I've discovered as a peer supporter, that sometimes you'll call people and they'll say, I'm fine, I'm okay. Leave out of just being able to chat to someone who's done those kinds of stories and knows what they're going through. And it makes them feel that they're not alone, that, we've all done those kinds of stories and we all survive. We're pretty much resilient.
The first level is a peer person, a peer being someone that you work with, who knows you, who understands what you do professionally, and who's a bit of a mate. If you speak to absolutely no one, it's really important to speak to a peer. The second level is what we have in the ABC program is the peer support program, and those people are people who have done a full day intensive training of trauma awareness, awareness of resilience factors and reactions of trauma. So what we do is that train those people in listening skills as well, and they just have a little more knowledge, what we call an educated ear. They have a little bit more understanding of the impact of trauma and how to maintain and build resilience, because we also want to get across the factor that most media professionals are very resilient human beings, and sometimes all you need to do is download with someone who has got a bit of an educated ear. So that would be the second port of call to speak to those people. Those people are also trained to pick up a little bit as to whether they need to refer to a health professional or a GP or a counsellor. So if someone accesses the peer supporter, the staff person might be told that, look, it might be a good idea to go and access a counsellor and talk to a counsellor, and they will talk them through that process and what will happen and how it will be. So the third level would be if you are still feeling significantly distressed after you had spoken to the peer support person, you would then access a counsellor or your GP and go and get some help about de-stressing and bringing down the level of distress that you're feeling after the traumatic exposure.
As a cameraman, offering peer support and having received peer support myself from my colleagues interstate, I'm absolutely convinced now in my own mind that the program is of tremendous benefit and importance to the staff and to the ABC, and I can't encourage people any more than I already do to be involved.